now.
Yeah. I think the two things that I regret that I started doing probably 8 or 9 years into the business that I wish I would have done sooner was I hired a business coach, and then it led into a lot of different mentorship programs. So I think definitely trying to learn from other people. That I was winging it. Like I look back and like, how did anyone hire us? Like I look at our documents and stuff. I'm like, this is terrible. Like,
Welcome to the Adriana Ostapenko podcast. I'm here with a good friend, Serena. It's such a pleasure to have you here. We've met a while ago now and been following each other and staying in close contact. We were part of a masterminds together. Actually, I feel like you joined after I left that
we
same
kind of crossed
mastermind.
paths.
But we met numerous times. Serena is a realtor, amongst other things, real estate investor, and just an awesome human being, woman in business. And I'm very excited to have you here. So welcome.
Great. Thanks for having me.
I'm gonna pass it off to you and let you introduce yourself. Tell us who you are and what you
Yeah.
do.
So obviously you mentioned I'm a licensed realtor now, but that's actually a very new part of my career. I ran a brand experience agency called Tigris Events for 18 years, which I just sold. Actually, on Valentine's Day, we closed last year. So I've been about 18 months out of the events industry. And I had actually been introduced to the concept of real estate investing through one of my business coaches, which led into, all the things that I'm doing now and reaping the benefits of as a passive real estate investor, and just trying to, get some money back. Now I can move forward and be more active as well. And then, as you know, I've got a podcast called Inspired to Invest, which I launched back in June. And I also have a book called The Accidental Entrepreneur. So that's been out for a couple of years, and it basically chronicles, my story and how I fell into entrepreneurship.
I love that. We can talk about entrepreneurship for a while. What is your main focus right now?
Yeah. So like I said, I'm waiting for some funds to come back. I think one thing I've learned as a passive real estate investor is patience. So, there are a number of different projects that I've invested in, or different real estate investors that I have invested with. And some of those things have taken a little longer than expected to come back. So I did have a chunk of money I was expecting back in July. And my intention was to move forward joint venturing with a business like yours, where people have those systems kind of in place, and I can just keep on repurposing my capital every year or two. But I think I'm waiting until January now for that to happen. So I think in the meantime, I've just been focusing on, building up the podcast, and also looking to build my network more in my community. I've been in Pickering for 30 years, but I actually don't know that many people. So working as a realtor is very, very different compared to my old agency. So proximity and being close to people really matters. Where with my old business, we worked with companies in Europe, the United States, Australia. It didn't matter. Like they would find us here. So it's a very different dynamic to really have to find people in your backyard. So I'm trying to straddle kind of both of those lines right now.
We kind of do the same on our end because we have a construction company, which is, as you can imagine, quite local,
Yeah.
the areas that we service, as well as I have a virtual agency, which is fully remote, and we work with people all around.
Yeah.
So it's a good balance between the two, and something that we've started to do more and more, just getting involved in local like community things.
Yeah.
So sponsoring local like festivals that we have, soccer
Yeah.
teams, different things like that, just kind of getting out there in the community and getting to be a bit more well known. That allows us to get some momentum there.
Yeah. That makes
Um,
perfect sense.
Tell me a little bit, and I just outside of real estate for a second here, talking business.
Yeah.
Tell me a little bit about what it was like to transition out of the business that you own on the event space, and what made that sale
Yeah.
possible.
Yeah. So I actually tried to sell it before COVID for a few reasons. So I had my daughter in December of 2019, and I had, built up my business to a certain size. There was 10 of us working full time at our office, and then we had a couple thousand working part time across the country. And there was one girl in my office that had been with me for 6 years. So I, had groomed her to basically take over and be my mat leave replacement for a couple of years. And she ended up resigning just a couple of months after my daughter was born. So I was literally like had a meltdown. Like, how am I supposed to do this? Like, I have an infant at home, and we were very, very high volume. So I basically went out and found a mergers and acquisitions company to value the company and sell it. And then we went into lockdown like 3 weeks later. So we had a buyer even lined up, and obviously they were very concerned because first of all, we couldn't operate. And second of all, we had the overhead of the office. So there were some fixed costs that you couldn't avoid. So basically I ended up letting my entire team go except for one person. And I just wanted her available so that as we could do business, we could ramp up. Like we're still quoting, like no one obviously knew what was happening. So I wanted the support kind of as we went in and out of lockdowns and stuff like that. And I just made as many decisions as I could to cut back and kept the business going and tried to take advantage of government grants and stuff like that. And then as we were kind of coming out of, not to say we're even completely out of it, but at the beginning of last year, we are kind of starting to come out of it. We are starting to get busier. And the girl that I'd held on to ended up finding a new position. And I just knew like my back was against the wall. Like I didn't have it in me to build the company back up to where we were. Like we didn't have a team anymore. We had no office anymore. Like I knew like I had to find someone that could scale as quickly as they needed to accommodate all the work that was going to come back in. So I basically got a mutual release from the company that I hired to sell it. I was like, you've had 2 years, it hasn't happened. So I got that release, and then I basically spoke to about 15 agencies in Toronto, and I had it sold in 2 weeks, and I closed 2 weeks after that.
Congratulations on the sale. I'm sure it was a huge journey. We put so much time and passion and effort into building it up.
Yeah.
I'm sure it feels, I haven't sold a company yet. I've sold buildings though, and I'm sure it feels like
Yeah.
bittersweet at the end of the day with that.
Yeah.
What would you say as an entrepreneur building that business was, the top things that you've learned that would help somebody build a business now?
Yeah. I think the two things that I regret that I started doing probably 8 or 9 years into the business that I wish I would have done sooner was I hired a business coach, and then it led into a lot of different mentorship programs. So I think definitely trying to learn from other people. That I was winging it. Like I look back and like, how did anyone hire us? Like I look at our documents and stuff. I'm like, this is terrible. Like, I think there's just a lot of things that you can learn from people, and they can help you where you want to get to go faster. And just even how you quote things and know your numbers and what metrics are and like what your margins are, like all of those things. Like I was 23 just out of school when I kind of started doing this, and I didn't have anyone to learn from. I never even had a corporate job before. So I think having coaches and mentors helps a lot. And then the other thing was for our business was really SEO. So we had a meeting, I think we were like a year into the business, and this guy was talking to us about search engine optimization. And we were kind of like, we're fine. And like at that time, it was 2005 or something. So we just didn't really grasp the power of it. And even when we finally had a website, it probably looked like a Word document. Like it was awful. But if we had have been doing that, like we started doing it 8 years in, and if I'd done it then, like I can just imagine like what kind of growth we would have seen getting in that much sooner. So we ended up doing a lot of targeted keyword research and digital marketing just because we had to. Like we lost our biggest client, and we had to bring in new opportunities, and it was transformative. Like our business started bringing in, like every year it was 100 more leads than the previous year. So say we started with 100. By the time we went into COVID, I think we were around 750. So you can imagine, like if you're incrementally growing by that many more leads every single year, and then you're transitioning a lot of them into repeat business, like that's huge. So if we did that 8 years sooner, probably be like living on a beach somewhere right now, right?
So really like SEO on your website.
It was huge because everyone would Google search like Toronto event staffing agencies, Calgary brand ambassadors, and that's how people all around the world would kind of find us when they had events happening here. So it wasn't limited to just businesses here. Like people would have trade shows, or we did a viral video for one company from the UK, and they would all search that, and we ranked for hundreds of keywords on the first page of Google. So it brought us tons and tons of business.
That's fantastic. So ultimately marketing, getting the word out there and being visible to your clientele makes a big difference.
Yeah.
I don't think people realize that, or I mean, as business owners, we're all figuring it out. I remember my first in the real estate side, my first like investment packages that I put together. When I look back now, they've improved significantly. But there's also no other way. Like it is a process of figuring it out, diving into it, trying different things until you turn a corner, until you've dialed in your formula to a point where you're like, okay, I feel
Yeah.
confident. I can go do something else or add another service or product.
Yeah.
You've gotten enough in there. How are
Yeah.
you applying some of the learnings that you had there in your real estate
Yeah.
career?
I mean, I think they're very similar but different, obviously. Like, I think what I found, especially with having my real estate license, it's different because with my old agency, we were business to business. So even though what our staff went out and did could be like more business consumer, we were very much like corporate budgets. People will Google search us traditionally. I'm not going to say relationships don't matter, but it's not the same. Like they would start working with you and it becomes really transactional and all of that. And I think when you're helping someone buying and selling houses, like it's very, very, very personal. So it's very B2C and it's more about the personal touches. So how often you can keep in touch with someone or how many people you literally might talk to in a day can matter a little bit more. Like I think it's just such a more mainstream industry. Like everybody probably knows a dozen realtors at any point in time. So it's just a very different technique. So I'm trying to figure out what the best way it is to, approach people kind of within my industry. But I think when it comes to the real estate investing, and even having the podcast, like I think my focus and my goal would be to eventually support a partner with capital raising, because I found that since I started more openly talking about private lending and passive real estate investments, people kept on coming to me asking how they could do it. And I just found it really fulfilling because it changed my life. Like I really would have been screwed during the pandemic had I not found that, because I couldn't, my business wasn't making money anymore. Like we came to a complete standstill. So I feel like I understand the power behind it. And, people just keep coming to me for that. So I'm like, well, wouldn't it be nice if this was my own deal eventually? you know? So I think social media is obviously very powerful for that. It's a very engaged community that way. So I feel like I'm getting a lot of traction from the podcast. So I think it just depends on, what you're trying to do and the target audience that you're trying to reach.
So for those that don't know, tell me, what is private lending?
Yeah. So, I mean, when I started, it was a little different than what I'm doing now. But when I joined a real estate education company at that time, they'd really advocated for syndicated mortgages. So, in that particular instance, I was one of many lenders basically loaning into a mortgage that would facilitate, an active real estate investor. In this case, now I learned it was more land development oriented. It wasn't quite maybe as clear at that time that that's what it was for, but that's kind of how I started. And then a friend introduced me to her mortgage broker, and he would bring the opportunities that weren't necessarily real estate investing focused. It could be someone that needs a business loan. It could be someone that has to pay off their mortgage or line of credit for a period of time until their new mortgage comes through. And you're just making interest by loaning out those funds. So for example, you could be loaning out at 15% or 20%. And sometimes it could be a principal and interest payment. It could be interest only. It just could even be a bridge where it's owed at the end of it. But at the time I was using my home equity line of credit. So in the glory days of 3%, so you're borrowing your HELOC at 3%, you're loaning it out at 12 or 15%, and then you're making the spread. And then the interest on your HELOC is tax deductible. And then at the beginning of last year, so the beginning of 2022, I wanted to diversify. So I reached out to the real estate investing community I'm part of, and I just asked for referrals and like who was reputable. And I just really ramped up everything I was doing in terms of building those relationships and diversifying. And I've really been able to live off it successfully for probably about 4 years full time at this point in time.
That's fantastic. I mean, if you can literally, and it's, in my opinion, private lending is the most passive way to invest in real estate
Yeah,
and in and around real estate businesses. There's huge potential. You do have to do your due diligence, which I
of
want to
course.
talk about as well. But
Yeah,
ultimately, you lend your money to reputable, investors and companies
yeah,
that do this full time, and you get a quite high interest. It's hard to see that kind of interest paid out on a monthly basis.
yeah,
And it's cash flow in your pocket. You can leverage, like you said, a home line of credit or even a line of credit
yeah,
to be able to make a higher income. Even now at a 7%,
yeah,
a line of credit, you can still go out and invest and earn 15 to 20% interest on that money and keep the difference at the end of the day,
yeah.
which is what the banks do. But tell me a little bit about what goes into a due diligence on a private lending deal.
Yeah. I mean, I think now because the housing market and the economy has been really shifting in this last year, I think you have to be even extra careful now compared to before. When I was working with a mortgage broker, I would always ask for their identification and proof that they kind of own the property, and go back to Geo Warehouse and make sure that if there was a property indicated, that if they defaulted, I could put a lien on, and that's kind of your leverage in that situation. So I would always go back and double check the title to make sure that everything lined up. I think when it comes to real estate investors, especially if they are renovating a property or something like that, same thing, you want to have proof of ownership, but you also want to do credit checks, make sure that they have insurance, not just homeowners insurance, but builders insurance. So there are different things that you'll want to look into. I think one thing I've been exploring now, because I have had for the first time a couple of hiccups with different borrowers, I am now looking at more second position mortgages, just because I think they are that added layer of security.
I love that. I mean, this is the time where, there are more defaults than usual because of interest rates and how
Yeah.
expensive everything became, but also valuation has gone down.
Yeah.
Appraisers are not coming back as once they were, or what
Yeah.
we originally predicted they would come back at. So
Yeah.
sometimes people don't have the funds to pay you back immediately. They may
Yeah.
be able to pay you back, as the market improves, or holding
Yeah.
on to it. So first and second position mortgages have more security with them. And that's the beauty and the challenges of private lending for
Yeah. Yeah.
sure. Being able to be as secure and diversified as you can.
Yeah.
Definitely working with people that have been in the industry for a long time and know what they're doing, have substantial amount of net worth. The other thing that I find particularly for myself, because I do private lending as well, and I really enjoy it, honestly. I like to continue to build my private lending portfolio just because of how
Yeah.
passive it is.
Yeah.
Is I don't like working with companies that their primary model is private lending and or
Mhm.
private borrowing. It's if they're building their whole portfolio based solely or heavily on private funds at a high interest rate, that's a huge red flag for me,
Yeah.
because I'm an active investor. I run an asset management company, and I know very well how that plays out. So
Yeah.
we, in our case, for investors, 90% of the funds we raise are equity shares. So we're not committed to a fixed high monthly interest. We actually,
Yeah.
90% of our lending is a lending at the lowest interest rate we possibly can with
Yeah.
CMHC. If our latest mortgage we closed on was 4.8%
Yeah.
with CMHC. So we go for the lowest, best lending terms we can possibly get with A lenders.
Yeah.
And what the rest 10 to 20% will use private funds at a higher rate
Yeah.
for bridge loans and
Well, it's
construction
just not
loans.
sustainable,
It's not safe.
obviously, right? So I think for anyone, you would think, at least on the active side, like that's obviously not a long-term solution, and it may satisfy like a short-term need when you have to work quickly and you need access to funds, but it obviously shouldn't be something that you intend to keep going for, 3 years, because any equity you have will be depleted in interest payments. So
Yeah, I think, and honestly, knowing a lot of people in the industry and people that have that as their primary business model, I think
yeah.
the reason why they do it that way is because they want to keep 100% equity on a deal.
Yeah.
And I mean, last summer, recently had a conversation with a friend who did have, I mean, they're in a really good place, thankfully, but they did have that model in mind, or they started with the equity model, switched to lending, and her
Yeah.
question was, why would you give out so much equity to me?
Yeah.
And I said, this is a partnership. Like, I'm not here to make a quick buck or a quick turnaround. I'm here to partner and not only change our lives and our families, but investors as well. I'm
Yeah.
zero problem sharing the long-term benefits of investing. We're
Yeah.
also sharing the short-term, risks of investing as well. If
Mhm.
at a refinance we can't pay you 100% back, we'll pay you as much as we possibly can back.
Yeah.
But we're writing it out together. But you also get the big benefit of
Yeah.
the increase on the long term being
Yeah.
a passive investor with us. So
Yeah.
that makes me sleep well at night, and that's how we operate.
Yeah.
um, yeah, this is exciting. What does the future look like for you? What are you hoping to grow into?
Yeah, I think, because I never intended to keep all the funds I had access to in private lending. So, I mean, ideally, I was using my HELOC on the personal side, and I had money in my business that I intended to acquire a new property with. So, ideally, I would like to joint venture with someone that I can start building that equity and, again, repurpose that capital so that maybe in the next 5 to 10 years, I have a portfolio that's worth X number of doors or X number of value or whatever that may be. Because I think you do need to have balance. At the same time, you've got to have the cash flow to pay for your standard of living and things like that. I do think that I'm working towards finding those opportunities with capital raising. So I think I don't necessarily want to do it completely by myself. Like I don't want to go and take a massive project alone. But if there is a company that needs that support to scale where they have those systems in place, but maybe they can't do all of it and they want to be more on the operations side, then I think I'd like to try to fulfill that spot within a company that already exists. And I think having my podcast, for example, will help support that because people have the chance to get to like, know, and trust you, and they get to see kind of what your stance is on certain things and how you communicate and what to expect and all of that. So I think by having an equity stake in those kinds of projects, it will continue to, again, add to the portfolio. And, I think having young family, like I always want to be mindful of the work-life balance. So I think I have far more now than I ever did because I think my business is so high volume. I just can't imagine going back to that at this point in time, but, just trying to enjoy the best of everything when it comes to family and life and travel and all of that as well.
This is really interesting. I do have a question that I usually ask people about work life and health balance. I was having this discussion with my husband. I mean, we have three businesses, and like work life balance is quite important to me.
Yeah.
Same reason I have two kids. They're 8 and 10, so a little older and more independent, but you know what, they still need me and they're still home and they enjoy spending time with me, and I want to take advantage of that for as long as I can. Be here for them, spend time with them. So I kind of set up my schedule in life in a way that I'm, done, quote unquote, done working by 3:30, and really like not booking any meetings after that to the best of my ability. They sneak in here and there as needed.
Yeah.
But and everything, the decisions that I make in business in terms of how do I run it, what systems do I need, who do I need to hire, they're really based on like how do I still access my time today. I think there's a narrative that says you don't have an option. You have to give your life and blood and sweat and tears and everything that you got for your business for years and years until you can take a step back. And I've been intentional about challenging that notion.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying I have answers or all the answers here, but like, how do you grow but continue today to have the time for your family and for your kids, and don't just ignore that for years?
Yeah, I think, obviously it helps that I have the passive income. So I'm not necessarily like stressed about covering my bills or anything like that. So it's a little bit different where I can take on, new clients, for example, based on, if they're the right fit. I'm not just going to take on necessarily everybody at this point. I've kind of learned that the hard way this last year or two, like who's really the right fit and who is deserving of your time, right? But I think for me, I try to just batch the work that I'm doing so it's easier to do things. So for example, if you're working on your social media videos, like batch them for a month or two and you send them off to get edited. When I'm doing the podcast, like I'm not sure how you do it, but like I'll do 6 a day for 2 days straight, but then I'm covered for 3 months. And then it's just a matter of, securing your sponsors and editing. So I try to batch a lot of the work that I do just to be more efficient with things. And it doesn't mean that things can't come up. Like if you end up booking, a new sponsor, sometimes I'll like jump in and do like an additional recording or something like that. But I found that to be a really effective use of my time. And I think just having an agency that was so busy, like I was used to always being very high volume. So, anything in my inbox, for example, needs to be dealt with. Anything is also like filed, acknowledged, put away, So as it comes in, it's just kind of a quick way to make sure that I'm not scattered, like when my day starts. So I have different things that I've kind of put in place. And that way, when things do come up, it's not as stressful because you're usually working ahead like 4 to 8 or 12 weeks, right? So it's not like all of a sudden you got really busy for a week and everything else is going to fall apart because you left everything to the last minute.
That's a really key, skill set to have. And like you said, it came from your when you were building your business and having to do it that way and training yourself to do that. Because I feel like I own a virtual agency, and we help small businesses,
Yeah.
get organized. Is a huge part of what we do. Most businesses, when they come to us, it's just putting out fires every day, all
Yeah.
day. They have a million things. They don't know where anything is.
Yeah.
So part of what we do is we come in and we just help them get organized as the first
Yeah.
step. Let's clean that inbox. Let's implement those very first systems in
Yeah.
your company so everybody knows where everything is, so everybody's on
Yeah.
the same page. There's clear line of communication, a skill set that a lot of visionaries don't always have.
Yeah.
As visionaries, we're like, out there creating and
Yeah.
envisioning and, creating work for ourselves, but don't have the skill sets of organizing
Yeah.
and implementing things
Yeah.
as well.
Mhm.
Awesome. Tell me a little bit about the real estate market. So things have shifted significantly.
Yeah.
You're a realtor, so I'm sure you're seeing the shift and change in the market. This is my that I'm an since I've been in the real estate industry, this is my first down market. Tell me a little bit about what you're seeing out there and what would you suggest to home buyers and home sellers, and what's the best way to get their transactions completed at this time?
Yeah. I mean, I think I have had my fair share of challenges just in the little bit of time that I've been actively working. And what I have found with some of the sellers, for example, is that a lot of them are really attached to the prices like they thought they could get if they sold last year or 6 months before and stuff like that. So I think it just is really, really important that anyone that wants to possibly sell needs to look at what's happening in the market, because at the end of the day, like, sure, you can list it at what you think it's worth. It doesn't mean it's actually worth that. And I think the interest that you have from buyers is going to dictate whether or not a property moves. So I have found instances at the beginning of, I guess it was April last year. So it was right after the first mortgage rate increase. We went to market. There was a girl I was working with that inherited a property, and she, in her mind, wanted 1.5. The comps were dictating 1.3. She was getting offers. She even got firm offers around 1.3. And she just had it in her mind. She wanted the 1.5. So she decided to take it off and wait for a period of time. But now things are probably even worse now than they were then. So she could be holding on to it for a little while. And then I had another couple I was working with this year that were going through a separation, and same thing. They wanted the price that they thought they could get last year because they also had a lot of debt on their mortgage. And they were looking at it from the standpoint of they need a certain amount of money to go out and put down on two separate properties now. So in their mind, that's how they justified what the property was worth. And even at the end, they actually got the price that they would have wanted, and they walked away because there was conditions on it. And I was like, that was never even an issue. Like, for 4 months of working with them, that was never even a possible concern. It was always about the money. And then now, like, that was April. So if you look at where we're at now, like, they could be stuck sharing that house for a really long time at this point, right? So I think I did everything I could to just get them to understand the reality of the circumstances. So I think, people just have to look at the facts. They need to be less, working on their emotions or like what they think or feel. Like that's just not how the market works, right? And then on the opposite side for buyers, like, I think having your pre-approvals in place and being pre-qualified, all of that obviously is super, super important. But now there's the opportunity to negotiate. Like, things aren't necessarily selling on an offer night. So I think it's, as much as the interest rates can be intimidating or overwhelming for some people trying to like run those numbers, like, I think you can get creative and just look for the opportunities in different properties, right? Like, it doesn't have to have all the bells and whistles, because you can go and do that yourself. And maybe you can get a deal if something hasn't been fully modernized or updated, right? So I think just trying to find where maybe you can house hack, or maybe you can do different things with it. Like, I think you just have to, look for the potential.
This is a buyer's market now, and we've been, I mean, in many ways, complaining that it was a seller's market if you're trying to purchase property. So this
Yeah.
it's that opening
Yeah.
for buyers to get in,
Yeah.
which is interesting because there's still a lot of gloom and doom in the markets,
Yeah.
and pessimism, because even though prices are good and now you can negotiate when before you couldn't really,
Yeah.
interest rates are high.
Yeah.
So it's just I'm not sure that's ever going to change in
Yeah.
terms of how the market works. but there is buying opportunity right now, and it takes a minute for sellers to adjust to that. Like you
Yeah.
said, we've been putting offers, and
I'd say
this is
more than
only
a
a
minute.
yes, a couple of
Mm,
years, I'd say. We've been putting offers on
yeah.
apartment buildings, even the apartment buildings. Sellers want to sell, for the price of what it will be once it's optimized and once
Yeah.
interest rates are low again. I'm
Yeah.
like,
And they may not
you're selling
necessarily
me
be
future
low for a long
valuation.
time. Like some of the events that I've been to recently where they're looking at things like a lot of people seem to believe like we're going to be sitting around these rates probably for the next 10 years, like within maybe a point up or down. So I think just when you look at the cycles and stuff like that, a lot of people are like, oh, that when they come down next year, and it's like, well, they're not going to come down to like where they were. So you're going to be waiting for a really long time.
That's interesting. So is that what do you think it will probably stay up for a good 10 years?
I think it's possible. I mean, when I bought my first house, which was back in 2007, my rate was 5.87 or something like that. So I ended up breaking it after the market shifted. It's obviously within my benefit to do so because I knocked, I think, 15 years and a few $100s a month off my amortization. But I mean, that was kind of like the average rate for many, many years at that point in time, right? I think the big difference is that housing prices are much, much higher now than they were 15 years ago. They're not going to go down to that. At least it would be highly, highly unlikely. So I think it wouldn't surprise me that they stay within a couple percent of where they are right now for an extended period of time.
Yeah, and again, I feel like I'm experiencing it as a first time, like going through this cycle now.
Yeah.
But that's my feeling as well,
Yeah.
and understanding where the new market is going to be at and how to
Mhm.
adapt and shift your plans and strategies in that direction.
Yeah.
Very exciting. Last question for you. If you had 30 seconds, if you had the world's attention for 30 seconds, what message would you share?
Yeah, I think investing in yourself is just so important. So I think no matter how you want to look at that, I think just again, your network is your net worth. I think you have so much power in education and networking, getting to know people and just accelerating your journey. So I think you should embrace that. And I think that investing is so much more important now than it ever was. Just you've got to hedge against inflation. And I think you just have to create the opportunities because no job is really going to provide that for you.
I love that. And that's definitely investing in yourself is number one on my list. The better I can be, the better I can show up for my business, my
Yeah.
kids, my marriage,
Yeah.
myself. And that's number one for sure. Thank you so much, Serena. It's such a pleasure talking to you always. We could probably talk forever. So thank you so much for joining in. Where can people find you and where can people hear your podcast?
Yeah, for sure. So one page would be Serena Homes Realtor. So that's anything pertaining to like buying and selling homes, investing. I share a lot of more lifestyle related content for real estate and then also Inspired to Invest podcast. And then everything's connected under my YouTube channel under Serena Homes Realtor as well.
Amazing. Make sure to follow her podcast is fantastic. I have an episode on there, but also lots and lots of good people, lots of good tidbits and information. Thank you for joining the Adriana Ostapenko podcast. I'm sure I'll be seeing you very soon. Thanks, Serena.
Oh, awesome. Thank you. Thank you.